Richard shook his head. He wanted to know what was on his property. He wanted to know now. Vincent nodded slowly. He walked back to his truck and retrieved his angle grinder from the toolbox. If they were going to open that door, they would have to cut through those chains first. His hands were trembling slightly as he climbed down into the pit and approached the iron entrance. Up close, the door was even more intimidating. The chains wrapped around it were thick and rusted, but still solid. The wax seals bore strange symbols that Vincent did not recognize. He tried not to think about what those symbols might mean. He powered on the angle grinder and pressed the spinning disc against the first chain. Sparks flew through the dim light of the pit as the steel groaned and resisted. Vincent worked methodically, cutting through one chain after another. Marcus and Richard watched from above in tense silence. After nearly 20 minutes, the last chain fell away and clattered against the stone floor of the pit. Vincent turned off the grinder and set it aside. He placed both hands on the cold iron door and pushed. For a moment, nothing happened. The door seemed to be stuck, sealed not just by chains but by decades of rust and neglect. Vincent pushed harder, throwing his shoulder against the metal. With a horrible creaking sound, the door slowly swung inward. A wave of stale, musty air rushed out from the darkness beyond. Vincent coughed and waved his hand in front of his face. He pulled his flashlight from his belt and aimed it into the black void. The beam cut through the dust particles floating in the air, illuminating what lay inside. Vincent saw stone walls, a floor covered in debris, and in the center of the room, something that made his heart stop. He stumbled backwards so violently that he tripped over his own feet and fell to the ground. His flashlight clattered against the stone as a scream escaped his throat. Marcus was already climbing down into the pit before Vincent even finished shouting. He grabbed his friend by the shoulders and asked what he had seen. Vincent could barely speak. His face was white as a sheet. He pointed toward the open doorway with a shaking hand and managed to choke out a single word: coffin. The three men stood at the entrance of the underground chamber, none of them willing to step inside. Richard was the first to gather his courage. He took Vincent's flashlight and aimed it into the room. There, in the center of the stone floor, sat an ornate velvet coffin. But that was not what had made Vincent scream. What had made Vincent scream were the mechanisms surrounding it. Mounted to the ceiling was a massive granite slab, easily weighing 2 tons, suspended by a complex system of ropes and pulleys. Connected to those ropes was a shotgun, its barrel aimed directly at the doorway. And connected to the trigger of that shotgun was a thin wire that ran all the way to the door they had just opened. Richard called the police immediately. Within 2 hours, the Hartwell estate was swarming with officers, detectives, and eventually historians from the state university. The scene was cordoned off, and experts were brought in to carefully disarm the deadly trap before anyone could enter the chamber safely. What they discovered over the following days was almost too bizarre to believe. The coffin contained the remains of a man named Enzo Carlucci, a notorious mafia boss who had operated in the Virginia and Washington area during the 1920s. Carlucci had been known for his extreme paranoia, trusting no one, not even in death. According to historical records, he had commissioned this private mausoleum to be built in secret on land he had purchased under a false name. The trap was his final act of vengeance. The mechanism was designed so that when the door opened, it would sever a rope connected to the shotgun's trigger. The blast would then release the 2-ton granite slab, crushing anyone who dared to disturb his eternal rest, and entombing them alongside him as punishment for their intrusion. But there was one thing Carlucci had not counted on: time. Decades of moisture had seeped into the chamber, and rust had slowly jammed the firing pin of the shotgun. When Vincent opened that door, the trap had tried to activate. But the mechanism failed. By nothing more than pure luck, Vincent Baldwin had avoided being buried alive in a forgotten tomb with a dead gangster. Investigators later determined that a landslide, likely caused by a severe storm in the 1950s, had buried the mausoleum under feet of soil. Over time, the landscape above it had flattened and blended with the surrounding terrain. The structure had been completely forgotten, erased from memory and hidden from the world for over 70 years. Today, the Hartwell estate has become something of a local landmark. Richard decided to preserve the mausoleum rather than destroy it. A reinforced glass floor now covers the chamber, allowing visitors to peer down at the velvet coffin and the deadly trap mechanism that still hangs from the ceiling. A plaque at the entrance tells the story of Enzo Carlucci and his murderous paranoia, a chilling reminder of how far some men will go to protect their secrets, even from beyond the grave. As for Vincent, he still works as a landscaper in Virginia, but he admits that every time his equipment hits something solid beneath the soil, his heart skips a beat. He always thinks about that morning on the Hartwell estate. He always thinks about how close he came to never walking out of that pit. And he always thinks about the rusted firing pin that saved his life.